What would you do if someone offered you $10 million to pretend to be in love with them for a year? The camera pans across a busy city street, focusing on a woman huddled in a doorway, her possessions packed in a worn backpack beside her. Rain pours down, and pedestrians hurry past, not sparing her a glance. Alexandra Rivers hadn't always lived on the streets. Once, she'd been a promising art student with dreams of opening her own gallery. But life had other plans. After a series of unfortunate events, her father's sudden death, her mother's decline into alcoholism, and the economic crash that wiped out their savings, she found herself homeless at 28. For the past 3 years, she'd managed to survive by doing odd jobs and sleeping in shelters when she could. She still carried a sketchbook everywhere, capturing the raw humanity of street life, clinging to her passion even as hope dimmed. Maxwell Donovan, on the other hand, had never known struggle. As the heir to Donovan Industries, a tech conglomerate worth billions, he'd been born into privilege. Handsome, charming, and undeniably brilliant, he had expanded his family's empire even further since taking over as CEO 5 years ago. At 35, he was one of the most eligible bachelors in the country. But Maxwell had a problem. His grandfather's will, the source of his controlling share in the company, contained an unusual clause to maintain his position as CEO, and Maxwell needed to be married by his 36th birthday. With just 12 months remaining, his grandfather's antiquated values threatened everything he'd worked for. "I don't have time for love," Maxwell told his assistant, Harrison, as his sleek black Bentley navigated through downtown. "Romance is inefficient. I need a business solution." Harrison adjusted his glasses nervously. "Sir, with all due respect, marriage isn't exactly a merger or acquisition." "Isn't it, though?" Maxwell replied, his eyes cold with calculation. "Two parties enter an agreement for mutual benefit. The only difference is the emotional complication, which we'll simply remove from the equation." As the car stopped at a red light, Maxwell's gaze drifted to the window. Through the rain-streaked glass, he noticed a woman sheltering in a doorway. Despite her circumstances, there was something dignified about her, the way she held herself, the careful manner in which she protected a book in her jacket. "Stop the car," he ordered suddenly. "Sir?" "Alpha." "I said stop the car, Harrison." Maxwell stepped out into the rain without waiting for his umbrella, an idea forming in his mind. This woman, clearly in desperate circumstances, might be the perfect solution to his problem. No emotional attachments, or a clear financial incentive, and after the year was up, they could go their separate ways. Little did Maxwell know that this business arrangement would change everything he thought he knew about value, worth, and love. Alexandra looked up as an expensive shoe stepped into her line of vision. Rain dripped from the tailored hem of a suit that probably cost more than she'd made in her best year. Her eyes traveled upward to meet the calculating gaze of a man whose face she recognized from business magazines and billboards. "Excuse me," he said, his voice cultured and confident. "I have a business proposition for you." She laughed, a harsh sound. "Sorry, I don't have any business to offer someone like you." "On the contrary," Maxwell replied, unfazed by her hostility. "I believe you have exactly what I need." Alexandra's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "And what's that?" "Your time. 1 year of it, to be precise." Harrison appeared with an umbrella, which Maxwell ignored. "Sir, perhaps this isn't the place." "I'll give you $10 million to marry me for 1 year," Maxwell continued, cutting off his assistant. "A business arrangement, nothing more. You'll live in my home, attend events as my wife, and when the year is up, we'll quietly divorce. You'll leave with financial security, and I'll maintain control of my company." Alexandra stared, waiting for the punchline. When none came, she stood, gathering her dignity. "Is this some kind of sick joke?" "I don't joke about business, MS. Rivers. Alexandra Rivers. MS Rivers. I assure you this is a genuine offer. Complete discretion would be required, of course. A legal contract would protect both our interests." Alexandra felt anger rise in her chest. "But you think you can just buy a person?" That because I'm homeless I have no self-respect? On the contrary, Maxwell replied, his expression unchanged. I'm offering a mutually beneficial transaction. You need financial security, I need a temporary spouse. Emotion doesn't enter into it. And if I refuse, then I'll find someone else. There are many people in desperate situations, Mms. Rivers. The cold calculation in his voice made Alexandra shiver more than the rain. But something, perhaps pride, perhaps curiosity, made her stand her ground. Why me? There must be actresses or models who'd jump at this chance. Too much baggage, too many connections. I need someone unattached. His eyes scanned her meager possessions. Someone who can disappear into the role without external complications. Alexandra should have walked away. Every instinct told her this was wrong, degrading, impossible. But as thunder rumbled overhead and rain soaked through her thin jacket to the sketchbook she protected, she thought of warm rooms, of art supplies, of never having to worry about her next meal. I have conditions, she heard herself say. Maxwell's eyebrow raised slightly, the first crack in his businesslike demeanor. Name them. Bon. I keep my identity. No backstory where I become someone else. Oh, acceptable, though we'll need to polish your presentation. I want art supplies. A studio space. Why ice? Fine. And I won't sleep with you. At this, Harrison coughed uncomfortably, but Maxwell merely nodded. This isn't that kind of arrangement, Miss Rivers. Think of it as an extended acting job with excellent compensation. Alexandra took a deep breath. One more thing. I want part of the payment up front, before signing anything. Maxwell considered this. I'll provide housing, clothing, and a stipend immediately. $1 million upon signing the contract. The rest when our arrangement concludes successfully. Alexandra looked into the eyes of the billionaire, cold, calculating, seeing her as nothing more than a solution to a problem, and made a decision that would change both their lives. When do we start? Right now. Alexandra stood in the center of Maxwell's penthouse, feeling like an artifact in a museum, out of place, studied, valuable only for what she represented. The space was impossibly large, minimalist, all clean lines and muted colors. Like its owner, it was impressive but cold. Your new home, Maxwell announced, as Harrison directed staff to prepare a room. It doesn't look lived in, Alexandra observed. I value efficiency over sentimentality. A team of stylists, coaches, and assistants descended upon Alexandra in the following days. Her hair was cut and colored, natural, but enhanced, the stylist explained. Her wardrobe was replaced with designer clothing she could barely pronounce the names of. She received lessons in etiquette, current events, and the details of Maxwell's business that any fiancé would know. Throughout it all, Maxwell remained distant, observing her transformation with clinical interest. During their scheduled dinners practice for public appearances, he quizzed her on the information she'd been given. "You're not taking this seriously enough," he remarked one evening, after she'd forgotten the name of an important board member. "I'm learning the names of 40 strangers while adjusting to an entirely new life," Alexandra responded coolly. "Perhaps your expectations are unrealistic. My expectations are the terms of our agreement. And what exactly are you doing to uphold your end? Besides throwing money at the problem at me?" Maxwell's jaw tightened. "I'm protecting both our interests. The sooner you convince people this relationship is real, the sooner we both get what we want." Alexandra pushed away from the table. "You know what would help? If you actually talk to me like a person instead of a project. Your future wife should know something about you beyond your business holdings. That information is irrelevant to our arrangement. It's relevant if anyone asks me personal questions about you. What's your favorite color? Food. Do you have any hobbies? What side of the bed do you sleep on? These are things a real fiancé would know." For a moment, Maxwell looked genuinely puzzled. "But I haven't considered those details." "Of course not. Because you don't see me as a partner in this, even a fake one. I'm just another acquisition." Their first public appearance came sooner than Alexandra expected. A charity gala, one of the social highlights of the season. Her hands trembled as Harrison helped her from the car, cameras flashing as reporters recognized Maxwell. "Just smile and stay close to me," Maxwell murmured, his hand pressing against the small of her back as they approached the red carpet. "You look beautiful. They'll love you." It was the first compliment he'd given her, and its unexpectedness nearly made her stumble. Inside, Alexandra felt the curious stares, heard the whispered questions. Who is she? Where did she come from? How did Maxwell Donovan, notorious workaholic, find time for romance? "Breathe," Maxwell whispered as they approached a group of his associates. "Remember what we practiced. These are the Astors. Banking. 2 children at Princeton." But when they reached the group, Alexandra found herself freezing, the rehearsed facts evaporating from her mind. 3 pairs of eyes examined her with polite curiosity, waiting. Maxwell's arm tightened around her waist. "I apologize for my fiancée's silence. She's an artist, lives in her head half the time. It's what I love most about her." The improvised detail surprised Alexandra enough to bring her back to the moment. "He exaggerates," she managed to say. "I just get overwhelmed by new faces sometimes. It's lovely to meet you." Later, as they circulated through the room, Alexandra whispered, "An artist. That wasn't in our script." It seemed a natural explanation. "And it's true, isn't it? I saw your sketchbook. You looked through my things. I make it a point to know everything about my investments." The word stung, reminding Alexandra of exactly what she was to him. "Of course. Well, your investment needs air. I'll be on the terrace." Outside in the cool night air, Alexandra tried to regain her composure. But this was just a job, she reminded herself. Act the part, collect the money, start a new life. First big event, came a kind voice beside her. An older woman with silver hair and shrewd eyes offered her a glass of water. "You looked like you could use this more than champagne." "Thank you. Is it that obvious I don't belong here?" The woman smiled. "Only to someone who's been watching society events for 50 years. I'm Margaret Donovan." Alexandra nearly choked on her water. "But you're Maxwell's grandmother." "Yes," Margaret studied her with interest. "So you're the woman who finally captured my grandson's attention." I was beginning to think he'd marry his spreadsheets. "We haven't known each other long," Alexandra said carefully. "Love doesn't always need time, dear. Sometimes it knows immediately." Margaret's eyes twinkled. "Though I must say you're nothing like the women he usually associates with." Is that a compliment or a concern? Definitely a compliment. Those women reflected what Maxwell has become, all surface, no substance. Margaret patted Alexandra's hand. "There's something real about you. I hope you'll be good for him." Before Alexandra could respond, Maxwell appeared in the doorway, his expression tightening when he saw them together. "But grandmother, I see you've met Alexandra." "Indeed I have. She's lovely, Maxwell. Much too good for you." To Alexandra's surprise, a hint of a genuine smile crossed Maxwell's face. "On that we agree." As they drove home later that night, Alexandra noticed Maxwell was unusually quiet. "But did I do something wrong? Was I not convincing enough?" "No," he said, staring out the window. "You were perfect. Everyone was charmed. Even your grandmother. She's not part of this arrangement, is she?" Maxwell's expression hardened again. "No one knows about our agreement. Not even Harrison knows all the details. She seems to care about you a lot. My grandmother is a romantic. She believes in love, family, all the things that distract from what truly matters." "And what truly matters, Maxwell?" "Success, control, legacy." Alexandra studied his profile in the dim light of the car. "Sounds lonely." "Loneliness is a small price for achievement." "Is it? I've been both poor and lonely, and now I'm well provided for and lonely. I'm not sure material comfort makes the emptiness any easier to bear." Maxwell turned to her, really looking at her for perhaps the first time. "You're still lonely? Even with all this?" Alexandra gestured to the space between them. "What would you call this? We live together but exist in separate worlds. You've bought my presence, not my companionship." For a moment, something vulnerable flickered in Maxwell's eyes. Then his phone rang, and the moment was gone. 3 months into their arrangement, the rhythm of their charade had become almost natural. In public, they were the perfect couple, Maxwell attentive and proud, Alexandra gracious and charming. The press had embraced their romance, dubbing them Beauty and the Billionaire. In private, things were evolving in unexpected ways. Though they maintained separate bedrooms, they increasingly spent evenings together, Alexandra sketching while Maxwell worked, comfortable silence between them. Alexandra had claimed a sun-filled corner of the penthouse as her studio, transforming the sterile space with canvases, paints, and the creative chaos Maxwell had once avoided. To her surprise, he hadn't objected. "You're different when you create," he observed one evening, watching her work from the doorway. "More yourself. Art has always been my escape. The one thing no one could take from me." Maxwell approached, studying the canvas, a street scene depicting a mother and child huddled in a doorway while indifferent crowds passed by. "You see things others ignore," he said quietly. "Including you." His eyes met hers. "Especially me." The real shift came during a weekend trip to Maxwell's lake house, a necessary performance for the benefit of social media and his board members. Away from the city, Alexandra saw glimpses of a different Maxwell. He rose early to swim, prepared coffee without being asked, spent hours reading on the dock. On their last evening, as sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Alexandra found him standing alone by the water. "Your grandmother called," she said, joining him. "She's invited us for dinner next weekend." Maxwell nodded distantly. "This was my favorite place as a child," he said unexpectedly. "Before boarding school, before the expectations, before I understood what being a Donovan meant." Alexandra remained silent, sensing he needed to speak. "My grandfather built this house with his own hands before the company took off. But my father hated it, thought it was beneath our status. But my mother would bring me here whenever he traveled." A sad smile crossed his face. "She taught me to swim in this lake. You never talk about your parents. They died when I was 14. Plane crash. I'm sorry. Why sorry? My grandfather raised me after that, taught me that sentiment was weakness, that the company was our true legacy." Maxwell skipped a stone across the water. 3 bounces. I used to be able to get 5. Without thinking, Alexandra reached for his hand, surprised when he didn't pull away. "But thank you for showing me this place. It's just part of the act." And for a moment, the lie between them seemed to waver. The crisis. Photos of Alexandra, clearly homeless, sitting on a city sidewalk, appeared in a tabloid. The headline screamed, "Donovan's fiancé, from streets to penthouse." Furious, pacing his office as Harrison scrambled to contain the damage. "We were careful," Maxwell demanded. "Literally picked her up off the street in broad daylight," Harrison pointed out. "Someone must have remembered her face." Silently, the newspaper spread before her. "This was inevitable," she said finally. "You can't erase a person's past, but," Maxwell decided, "say it's someone who looks similar. Threaten legal action." Alexandra's voice was firm. "This ruins everything. I am or where I came from." She stood, facing him. "That was never part of our deal. This story will destroy your credibility, my reputation, the entire arrangement." Destroyed. Alexandra's voice rose. "Maybe living a lie is worse than facing the truth." Maxwell laughed bitterly. "The truth is you were desperate, and I needed a solution. That's all this ever was. Between them like a physical blow. Alexandra gathered her dignity, fighting back tears. I was a business solution, nothing more. I'll pack my things. Wait. Had not reached her position of influence by being passive. When Alexandra appeared at her doorstep that evening, distraught and ready to confess everything, Margaret simply opened her door wider. "It would take for one of you to crack," she said, pouring tea. "Though I admit I expected it would be Maxwell. You know, I've been watching my grandson conduct business deals for 20 years. I know when he's negotiating." Margaret's eyes were kind but penetrating. "What I don't know is whether what began as a transaction has become something else. The truth is out, and Maxwell is only concerned about his precious company. About losing something far more valuable." Respond, the doorbell rang. Margaret smiled knowingly, right on time. Doorway, dishevelled and uncharacteristically uncertain. "Grandmother," I need to his eyes found Alexandra, and he stopped. "You're here," Margaret said, disappearing with remarkable speed for a woman of her age. Moment. Finally, Maxwell stepped forward. He said, the words clearly unfamiliar on his tongue. What I said was unforgivable. Honest. What I needed to believe. He ran a hand through his hair. "The truth is, you stopped being a business arrangement to me months ago." Quickened. "What am I then?" "Everything I've been missing. Who made my house feel like a home. Who sees me not the CEO, not the Donovan heir, just me. Pray." "Dear," he interrupted. "I told them the truth, that I met you when you were experiencing homelessness, that I was immediately drawn to your strength and dignity, that the circumstances of our meeting don't change how I feel about you." In disbelief. "You admitted it publicly? What about the company?" "Controlling interest in a company." He took her hand. "I didn't realize that until I thought I'd lost you. The media frenzy that followed was intense but surprisingly positive. Maxwell's honesty transformed what could have been a scandal into an unlikely love story. And their backgrounds, so drastically different, became a symbol of bridging divides rather than a source of shame." Major art exhibition featuring Alexandra's work street scenes capturing humanity in its raw, unfiltered state. Maxwell found her in her studio, anxiously rearranging paintings. He assured her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, just like the artist. Into him, still amazed by how natural this had become. "But I keep thinking I'll wake up back on that street corner, that all of this has been an elaborate dream. We're sharing it." Maxwell turned her to face him. "There's something I need to tell you. The year is almost up. According to our original agreement, our arrangement ends next month." Trying to mask her pain. They hadn't discussed what would happen when the contract expired, neither willing to break the spell that had transformed their lie into something real. "Our options," Maxwell continued. D. 1 so pay. New arrangement. He reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box, one without an expiration date. As he opened it, revealing not the ostentatious diamond she might have expected months ago, but a simple band inlaid with small blue stones. Maxwell explained. "The same color as the paint you had on your hands the first time you laughed in my home. The first time I realized I wanted to hear that sound every day for the rest of my life." Eyes. "Are you sure? Your grandfather's conditions have been met. You don't need me anymore." Maxwell took her hand. Alexandra Rivers, I don't want to renew our contract. I want to tear it up completely and ask, with no conditions or business arrangements, if you'll marry me. For real this time. Alexandra pulled him close and kissed him a silent yes that conveyed everything words couldn't. The next evening was a triumph, but Alexandra's work powerful depictions of street life alongside newer pieces showing glimpses of hope and connection received critical acclaim. More importantly, the proceeds were dedicated to a new foundation supporting homeless artists. Spoke to reporters about her journey, Maxwell watched from across the room, marveling at the transformation they had both undergone. His grandfather, who had insisted on the marriage clause to force Maxwell to develop something beyond business in his life, would have been pleased with the unexpected result. Beside him, following his gaze, "You know, when you told me about your ridiculous scheme a year ago, I thought you'd finally lost your mind. You think I can't recognize my grandson's desperate business strategies?" She patted his arm. "But I also recognize something else, the possibility that your cold, calculating plan might accidentally lead you to exactly what you needed. You should have been running the company all these years. More important things to manage." She nodded toward Alexandra, "like making sure my grandson found happiness, not just success." As they returned to the penthouse, now warmer, filled with art and life and shared memories, Maxwell led Alexandra to the terrace overlooking the city. He said, handing her an envelope. Alexandra looked up in confusion. "I bought it." Maxwell looked almost shy, an expression that would have been unimaginable a year ago. "I thought we could convert it into affordable apartments for artists, with studios and gallery space. A place where talent isn't wasted because of circumstance." Flew to her mouth. Maxwell can reconsider the approach. She interrupted, tears streaming down her face. "It's absolutely perfect." Overlooking the city, the same city where they had met in such different circumstances, Alexandra reflected on the journey that had brought them here. A business arrangement that had blossomed into love. A contract that had evolved into commitment. Two people from different worlds who had created a new world together. Maxwell asked, his arms around her. "Unexpected paths lead exactly where we're meant to be. 1 year to the day after their first meeting, Alexandra and Maxwell stood in the rain on the very street corner where their story began. Now transformed, they laid flowers at a commemorative plaque marking the opening of Rivers Arts Foundation, a multi-million-dollar initiative providing housing, studio space, and opportunities for homeless artists. Alexandra murmured, her hand in Maxwell's. He corrected. "A spiral. We keep coming back to where we started, but we're different each time." Drew a crowd despite the weather, artists, business leaders, media, and most importantly, those currently experiencing homelessness who would benefit from the foundation's work. To cut the ribbon, he glanced at Alexandra, her eyes bright with tears of joy, but the simple gold band on her finger catching the light, and marveled at how differently he saw the world now. Where once he had seen only transactions and assets, he now saw possibility and connection. Without Alexandra, he told the gathering crowd, "She showed me that true value can't be calculated on a spreadsheet. That worth isn't determined by bank accounts or addresses, and that the best investments are the ones we make in each other." As they greeted the first residents of the new housing complex, a young woman approached Alexandra, clutching a sketchbook much like the one Alexandra had protected that rainy day a year ago. "Hope," she said simply, "that things can change, that people can change." Maxwell's hand. "They absolutely can." They walked home through the park, a simple pleasure Maxwell would never have considered before. Alexandra, he stopped suddenly. Asked, Thing. All this time I thought I was the one who rescued you that day in the rain. And? Wrong. You were the one who saved me. He touched her cheek gently. From a life of spreadsheets and empty achievements. From never knowing what it means to truly connect with another person. Each other, Alexandra replied. The walk, the rain gradually stopped, and sunlight broke through the clouds. A perfect metaphor, Alexandra thought, for the journey they had taken from darkness into light, from transaction into transformation. The story was unlikely the billionaire and the homeless woman finding meaning in each other, but Alexandra knew better. The true unlikelihood wasn't that they had found each other, but that they had been brave enough to let a business arrangement become something infinitely more valuable. In the end, that what began as a price $10 million for 1 year had become something priceless, a lifetime together, building something neither could have created alone,